A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. A word of explanation. It was in Warwick Castle that I came across the curious stranger whom I am going to talk about. He attracted me by three things: his candid simplicity, his marvelous familiarity with ancient armor, and the restfulness of his company, for he did all the talking. We fell together, as modest people will, in the tail of the herd that was being shown through, and he at once began to say things which interested me. As he talked along, softly, pleasantly, flowingly, he seemed to drift away imperceptibly out of this world and time, and into some remote era and old forgotten country. And so he gradually wove such a spell about me that I seemed to move among the specters and shadows and dust and mold of a gray antiquity, holding speech with a relic of it, exactly as I would speak of my nearest personal friends or enemies, or my most familiar neighbors. He spoke of Sir Bedivere, Sir Bors de Ganis, Sir Lancelot of the Lake, Sir Galahad, and all the other great names of the Table Round. And how old, unspeakably old, and faded and dry and musty and ancient he came to look as he went on. Presently he turned to me and said, just as one might speak of the weather or any other common matter: "You know about transmigration of souls? Do you know about transposition of epochs and bodies?" I said I had not heard of it. He was so little interested, just as when people speak of the weather, that he did not notice whether I made him any answer or not. There was half a moment of silence, immediately interrupted by the droning voice of the salaried cicerone. "Ancient hauberk, date of the 6th century, time of King Arthur and the Round Table, said to have belonged to the knight Sir Sagramore le Desirous. Observe the round hole through the chainmail in the left breast. Can't be accounted for. Supposed to have been done with a bullet since invention of firearms, perhaps maliciously by Cromwell's soldiers." My acquaintance smiled, not a modern smile, but one that must have gone out of general use many, many centuries ago, and muttered, apparently to himself, "Wit ye well, I saw it done." Then after a pause added, "I did it myself." By the time I had recovered from the electric surprise of this remark, he was gone. All that evening, I sat by my fire at the Warwick Arms, steeped in a dream of the olden time, while the rain beat upon the windows and the wind roared about the eaves and corners. From time to time, I dipped into old Sir Thomas Malory's enchanting book and fed at its rich feast of prodigies and adventures, breathed in the fragrance of its obsolete names, and dreamed again. Midnight being come at length, I read another tale for a nightcap, this which here follows, to wit: how Sir Lancelot slew two giants and made a castle free. Anon withal came there upon him two great giants, well armed, all save the heads, with two horrible clubs in their hands. Sir Lancelot put his shield afore him, and put the stroke away of the one giant, and with his sword he clave his head asunder. When his fellow saw that, he ran away as he were wood, for fear of the horrible strokes, and Sir Lancelot after him with all his might, and smote him on the shoulder, and clave him to the middle. Then Sir Lancelot went into the hall, and there came afore him 80 ladies and damsels, and all kneeled unto him, and thanked God and him of their deliverance. "For, sir," said they, "the most part of us have been here this 7 year, their prisoners, And we have worked all manner of silk works for our meat, and we are all great gentlewomen born, and blessed be the time, knight, that ever thou wert born. For thou hast done the most worship that ever did knight in the world. That will we bear record, and we all pray you to tell us your name, that we may tell our friends who delivered us out of prison. Fair damsels, he said, my name is Sir Lancelot du Lake. And so he parted from them and betaught them unto God. And then he mounted upon his horse and rode into many strange and wild countries, and through many waters and valleys, and evil was he lodged. And at the last, by fortune, him happened against a knight to come to a fair courtelage, and therein he found an old gentlewoman that lodged him with a good will, and there he had good cheer for him and his horse. And when time was, his host brought him into a fair garret over the gate to his bed. There Sir Launcelot unarmed him, and set his harness by him, and went to bed, and anon he fell on sleep. So soon after there came one on horseback, and knocked at the gate in great haste. And when Sir Launcelot heard this, he arose up and looked out at the window, and saw by the moonlight 3 knights came riding after that one man, and all 3 lashed on him at once with swords, and that one knight turned on them knightly again, and defended him. Truly, said Sir Launcelot, yonder one knight shall I help, for it were shame for me to see 3 knights on one, and if he be slain, I am partner of his death. And therewith he took his harness and went out at a window by a sheet down to the 4 knights. And then Sir Launcelot said on high, turn you knights unto me, and leave your fighting with that knight. And then they all 3 left Sir Kay and turned unto Sir Launcelot, and there began great battle, for they alight all 3, and strake many great strokes at Sir Launcelot, and assailed him on every side. Then Sir Kay dressed him for to have holpen Sir Launcelot. Nay, sir, said he, I will none of your help, therefore as ye will have my help, let me alone with them. Sir Kay, for the pleasure of the knight, suffered him for to do his will, and so stood aside. And then anon within 6 strokes Sir Launcelot had stricken them to the earth. And then they all 3 cried, Sir Knight, we yield us unto you as man of might matchless. As to that, Sir Launcelot, I will not take your yielding unto me, but so that ye yield you unto Sir Kay, the seneschal. On that covenant, I will save your lives and else not. Fair knight, said they, that were we loth to do, for as for Sir Kay, we chased him hither, and had overcome him, had not ye been. Therefore to yield us unto him, it were no reason. Well, as to that, said Sir Launcelot, advise you well, for ye may choose whether ye will die or live. For, and ye be yielden, it shall be unto Sir Kay. Fair knight, then they said, in saving our lives, we will do as thou commandest us. Then shall ye, said Sir Launcelot, on Whitsunday next coming go unto the court of King Arthur, and there shall ye yield you unto Queen Guinevere, and put you all 3 in her grace and mercy, and say that Sir Kay sent you thither to be her prisoners. On the morn, Sir Launcelot arose early and left Sir Kay sleeping, and Sir Launcelot took Sir Kay's armor and his shield and armed him. And so he went to the stable and took his horse, and took his leave of his host, and so he departed. Then soon after arose Sir Kay and missed Sir Launcelot, and then he espied that he had his armor and his horse. Now, by my faith, I know well that he will grieve some of the court of King Arthur, for on him knights will be bold and deem that it is I, and that will beguile them. And because of his armor and shield, I am sure that I shall ride in peace. And then soon after departed Sir Kay and thanked his host. As I laid the book down, there was a knock at the door, and my stranger came in. I gave him a pipe and a chair and made him welcome. I also comforted him with a hot Scotch whiskey, gave him another one, then still another, hoping always for his story. After a fourth persuader, he drifted into it himself in a quiet, simple, and natural way. The stranger's history. I am an American. I was born and reared in Hartford in the state of Connecticut. Anyway, just over the river in the country. So I am a Yankee of the Yankees, and practical, yes, and nearly barren of sentiment, I suppose, or poetry, or in other words. My father was a blacksmith. My uncle was a horse doctor, and I was both along at first. Then I went over to the great Colt Arms factory and learned my real trade, learned all there was to it, learned to make everything: guns, revolvers, cannon, boilers, engines, all sorts of labor-saving machinery. Why, I could make anything a body wanted, anything in the world. It didn't make any difference what. And if there wasn't any quick, newfangled way to make a thing, I could invent one and do it as easy as rolling off a log. I became head superintendent, had a couple of thousand men under me. Well, a man like that is a man that is full of fight. That goes without saying. A couple of thousand rough men under one has plenty of that sort of amusement. I had anyway. At last I met my match, and I got my dose. It was during a misunderstanding conducted with crowbars with a fellow we used to call Hercules. He laid me out with a crusher alongside the head that made everything crack and seemed to spring every joint in my skull and make it overlap its neighbor. Then the world went out in darkness, and I didn't feel anything more and didn't know anything at all, at least for a while. When I came to again, I was sitting under an oak tree on the grass with a whole beautiful and broad country landscape all to myself, nearly, not entirely, for there was a fellow on a horse looking down at me, a fellow fresh out of a picture book. He was in old-time iron armor from head to heel, with a helmet on his head the shape of a nail keg with slits in it. And he had a shield and a sword and a prodigious spear, and his horse had armor on too, and a steel horn projecting from its forehead, and a gorgeous red and green silk trappings that hung down all around him like a bed quilt, nearly to the ground. "Fair sir, will ye just?" said this fellow. "Will I which? Will ye try a passage of arms for land or lady, or for—" "What are you giving me?" I said. "Get along back to your circus or I'll report you." Now, what does this man do but fall back a couple of 100 yards and then come rushing at me as hard as he could tear, with his nail keg bent down nearly to his horse's neck and his long spear pointed straight ahead. I saw he meant business, till I was up the tree when he arrived. He allowed that I was his property, the captive of his spear. There was argument on his side and the bulk of the advantage. So I judged it best to humor him. We fixed up on agreement whereby I was to go with him and he was not to hurt me. I came down and we started away, I walking by the side of his horse. We marched comfortably along through glades and over brooks, which I could not remember to have seen before, which puzzled me and made me wonder. And yet we did not come to any circus or sign of a circus. So I gave up the idea of a circus and concluded he was from an asylum. But we never came to any asylum, so I was up a stump, as you may say. I asked him how far we were from Hartford. He said he had never heard of the place, which I took to be a lie, but allowed it to go at that. At the end of an hour, we saw a faraway town sleeping in a valley by a winding river, and beyond it, on a hill, a vast gray fortress with towers and turrets. the first I'd ever seen out of a picture. Bridgeport, I said, pointing. Camelot, said he. My stranger had been showing signs of sleepiness. He caught himself nodding now and smiled one of those pathetic, obsolete smiles of his and said, I find I can't go on, but come with me. I've got it all written out, and you can read it if you like. In his chamber, he said, first, I kept a journal. Then, by and by, after years, I took the journal and turned it into a book. How long ago that was. He handed me his manuscript and pointed out the place where I should begin. Begin here. I've already told you what goes before. He was steeped in drowsiness by this time. As I went out at his door, I heard him murmur sleepily, Give you good din, fair sir? I sat down by my fire and examined my treasure. The first part of it, the great bulk of it, was parchment and yellow with age. I scanned a leaf particularly and saw that it was a palimpsest. Under the old dim writing of the Yankee historian appeared traces of a penmanship which was older and dimmer still. Latin words and sentences, fragments from old monkish legends, evidently. I turned to the place indicated by my stranger and began to read as follows. The Tale of the Lost Land. Chapter 1, Camelot. Camelot, Camelot, said I to myself. I don't seem to remember hearing it before. Name of the asylum, likely. It was a soft, reposeful summer landscape, as lovely as a dream and as lonesome as Sunday. The air was full of the smell of flowers and the buzzing of insects and the twittering of birds, and there were no people, no wagons. There was no stir or life, nothing going on. The road was mainly a winding path with hoof prints in it, and now and then a faint trace of wheels on either side in the grass, wheels that apparently had a tire as broad as one's hand. Presently, a fair slip of a girl, about 10 years old, with a cataract of golden hair streaming down over her shoulders, came along. Around her head, she wore a hoop of flame-red poppies. It was as sweet an outfit as I ever saw. What there was of it, she walked indolently along, with a mind at rest, its peace reflected in her innocent face. The circus man paid no attention to her, didn't even seem to see her. And she was no more startled at his fantastic makeup than if she was used to his like every day of her life. She was going by as indifferently as she might have gone by a couple of cows. But when she happened to notice me, then there was a change. Up went her hands, and she was turned to stone. Her mouth dropped open. Her eyes stared wide and timorously. She was the picture of astonished curiosity touched with fear. And there she stood gazing in a sort of stupefied fascination, till we turned a corner of the wood and were lost to her view. That she should be startled at me instead of at that other man was too many for me. I couldn't make head or tail of it. And that she should seem to consider me a spectacle and totally overlook her own merits in that respect was another puzzling thing. And a display of magnanimity, too. That was surprising in one so young. There was food for thought here. I moved along as one in a dream. As we approached the town, signs of life began to appear. At intervals, we passed a wretched cabin with a thatched roof, and about it small fields and garden patches in an indifferent state of cultivation. There were people, too, brawny men with long, coarse, uncombed hair that hung down over their faces and made them look like animals. They and the women, as a rule, wore a coarse tow linen robe that came well below the knee, and a rude sort of sandals, and many wore an iron collar. The small boys and girls were always naked, but nobody seemed to know it. All of these people stared at me, talked about me, ran into the huts, and fetched out their families to gape at me. But nobody ever noticed that other fellow, except to make him humble salutation and get no response for their pains. In the town were some substantial windowless houses of stone scattered among a wilderness of thatched cabins. The streets were mere crooked alleys and unpaved. Troops of dogs and nude children played in the sun and made life and noise. Hogs roamed and rooted contentedly about, and one of them lay in a reeking wallow in the middle of the main thoroughfare and suckled her family. Presently, there was a distant blare of military music. It came nearer, still nearer, and soon a noble cavalcade wound into view, glorious with plumed helmets and flashing mail and flaunting banners and rich doublets and horsecloths and gilded spearheads. And through the muck and swine and naked brats and joyous dogs and shabby huts, it took its gallant way. And in its wake we followed through one winding alley and then another, and climbing, always climbing, till at last we gained the breezy heights where the huge castle stood. There was an exchange of bugle blasts, then a parley from the walls, where men at arms and hauberk and morion marched back and forth with halberd at shoulder, under flapping banners with the rude figure of a dragon displayed upon them. And then the great gates were flung open, the drawbridge was lowered, and the head of the cavalcade swept forward under the frowning arches, and we, following, soon found ourselves in a great paved court, with towers and turrets stretching up into the blue air on all the four sides, and all about us the dismount was going on, and much greeting and ceremony, and running to and fro, and a gay display of moving and intermingling colors, and an altogether pleasant stir and noise and confusion. Chapter 2, King Arthur's Court. The moment I got a chance, I slipped aside privately and touched an ancient, common-looking man on the shoulder and said in an insinuating, confidential way, "Friend, do me a kindness. Do you belong to the asylum, or are you just here on a visit or something like that?" He looked me over stupidly and said, "Marry, fair sir, me seemeth." "That will do," I said. "I reckon you are a patient." I moved away, cogitating, and at the same time keeping an eye out for any chance passenger in his right mind that might come along and give me some light. I judged I had found one presently, so I drew him aside and said in his ear, "If I could see the head keeper for a minute, only just a minute." "Prithee, do not let me." "Let you what?" "Hinder me then, if the word please thee better." Then he went on to say he was an undercook and could not stop to gossip, though he would like it another time, for it would comfort his very liver to know where I got my clothes. As he started away, he pointed and said yonder was one who was idle enough for my purpose, and was seeking me besides, no doubt. There was an airy, slim boy in shrimp-colored tights that made him look like a forked carrot. The rest of his gear was blue silk and dainty laces and ruffles, and he had long yellow curls and wore a plumed pink satin cap tilted complacently over his ear. By his look, he was good-natured. By his gait, he was satisfied with himself. He was pretty enough to frame. He arrived, looked me over with a smiling and impudent curiosity, said he had come for me, and informed me that he was a page. "Go along," I said. "You ain't more than a paragraph." It was pretty severe, but I was nettled. However, it never fazed him. He didn't appear to know he was hurt. He began to talk and laugh in happy, thoughtless, boyish fashion as we walked along, and made himself old friends with me at once, asked me all sorts of questions about myself and about my clothes, but never waited for an answer. Always chattered straight ahead, as if he didn't know he had asked a question and wasn't expecting any reply, until at last he happened to mention that he was born in the beginning of the year 513. It made the cold chills creep over me. I stopped and said a little faintly, "Maybe I didn't hear you just right. Say it again and say it slow. What year was it?" 513. 513? You don't look at it. Come, boy, I am a stranger and friendless. Be honest and honorable with me. Are you in your right mind? He said he was. Are these other people in their right minds? He said they were. And this isn't an asylum? I mean, it isn't a place where they cure crazy people? He said it wasn't. Well, then, I said, either I am a lunatic or something just as awful has happened. Now tell me, honest and true, where am I? In King Arthur's court. I waited a minute to let that idea shudder its way home, and then said, and according to your notions, what year is it now? 528, 19th of June. I felt a mournful sinking at the heart and muttered, I shall never see my friends again. Never, never again. They will not be born for more than 1,300 years yet. I seemed to believe the boy. I didn't know why. Something in me seemed to believe him. My consciousness, as you may say, but my reason didn't. My reason straightway began to clamor. That was natural. I didn't know how to go about satisfying it, because I knew that the testimony of men wouldn't serve. My reason would say they were lunatics and throw out their evidence. But all of a sudden, I stumbled on the very thing, just by luck. I knew that the only total eclipse of the sun in the first half of the 6th century occurred on the 21st of June AD 528 OS and began at 3 minutes after 12 noon. I also knew that no total eclipse of the sun was due in what to me was the present year, i.e. 1879. So if I could keep my anxiety and curiosity from eating the heart out of me for 48 hours, I should then find out for certain whether this boy was telling me the truth or not. Wherefore, being a practical Connecticut man, I now shoved this whole problem clear out of my mind till its appointed day and hour should come, in order that I might turn all my attention to the circumstances of the present moment and be alert and ready to make the most out of them that could be made. One thing at a time is my motto. And just play that thing for all it's worth, even if it's only 2 pair and a jack. I made up my mind to 2 things. If it was still the 19th century, and I was among lunatics and couldn't get away, I would presently boss that asylum or know the reason why. And if, on the other hand, it was really the 6th century, all right, I didn't want any softer thing. I would boss the whole country inside of 3 months, for I judged I would have the start of the best educated man in the kingdom by a matter of 1,300 years and upwards. I'm not a man to waste my time after my mind's made up, and there's work on hand. So I said to the page, now, Clarence, my boy, if that might happen to be your name, I'll get you to post me up a little if you don't mind. What is the name of that apparition that brought me here? My master and thine. That is the good knight and great lord Sir Kay the Seneschal, foster brother to our liege the king. Very good. Go on. Tell me everything. He made a long story of it, but the part that had immediate interest for me was this. He said I was Sir Kay's prisoner, and that in the due course of custom I would be flung into a dungeon and left there on scant commons until my friends ransomed me, unless I chanced to rot first. I saw that the last chance had the best show, but I didn't waste any bother about that. Time was too precious. The page said further that dinner was about ended in the great hall by this time, and that as soon as the sociability and the heavy drinking should begin, Sir Kay would have me in and exhibit me before King Arthur and his illustrious knights seated at the table round, and would brag about his exploit in capturing me, and would probably exaggerate the facts a little, but it wouldn't be good form for me to correct him, and not over safe either. And when I was done being exhibited, then ho for the dungeons. But he, Clarence, would find a way to come and see me every now and then and cheer me up and help me get word to my friends. Get word to my friends? I thanked him. I couldn't do less, and about this time a lackey came to say I was wanted. So Clarence led me in and took me off to one side and sat down by me. Well, it was a curious kind of spectacle and interesting. It was an immense place and rather naked, yes, and full of loud contrasts. It was very, very lofty, so lofty that the banners depending from the arched beams and girders away up there floated in a sort of twilight. There was a stone-railed gallery at each end, high up, with musicians in the one and women clothed in stunning colors in the other. The floor was of big stone flags laid in black and white squares, rather battered by age and use and needing repair. As to ornament, there wasn't any, strictly speaking, though on the walls hung some huge tapestries which were probably taxed as works of arts. Battle pieces they were, with horses shaped like those which children cut out of paper or create in gingerbread, with men on them in scale armor whose scales are represented by round holes, so that the men's coat look as if it had been done with a biscuit punch. There was a fireplace big enough to camp in, and its projecting sides and hood of carved and pillared stonework had the look of a cathedral door. Along the walls stood men-at-arms in breastplate and morion, with halberds for their only weapon, rigid as statues, and that is what they looked like. In the middle of this groined and vaulted public square was an oaken table which they called the Table Round. It was as large as a circus ring, and around it sat a great company of men, dressed in such various and splendid colors that it hurts one's eyes to look at them. They wore their plumed hats right along, except that whenever one addressed himself directly to the king, he lifted his hat a trifle just as he was beginning his remark. Mainly they were drinking from entire ox horns, but a few were still munching bread or gnawing beef bones. There was about an average of 2 dogs to 1 man, and these sat in expectant attitudes till a spent bone was flung to them, and then they went for it by brigades and divisions with a rush, and there ensued a fight which filled the prospect with their tumultuous chaos of plunging heads and bodies and flashing tails, and the storm of howlings and barkings deafened all speech for the time. But that was no matter, for the dog fight was always a bigger interest anyway. The men rose sometimes to observe it the better and bet on it, and the ladies and the musicians stretched themselves out over their balusters with the same object, and all broke into delighted ejaculations from time to time. In the end, the winning dog stretched himself out comfortably with his bone between his paws and proceeded to growl over it and gnaw it and grease the floor with it, just as 50 others were already doing, and the rest of the court resumed their previous industries and entertainments. As a rule, the speech and behavior of these people were gracious and courtly, and I noticed that they were good and serious listeners when anybody was telling anything. I mean, in a dog-fightless interval. And plainly, too, they were a childlike and innocent lot, telling lies of the stateliest pattern with the most gentle and winning naivety, and ready and willing to listen to anybody else's lie and believe it too. It was hard to associate them with anything cruel or dreadful, and yet they dealt in tales of blood and suffering with a guileless relish that made me almost forget to shudder. I was not the only prisoner present. There were 20 there were 20 or more. Poor devils, many of them were maimed, hacked, carved in a frightful way, and their hair, their faces, their clothing were caked with black and stiffened drenchings of blood. They were suffering sharp physical pain, of course, and weariness and hunger and thirst, no doubt, and at least none had not given them the comfort of a wash, or even the poor charity of a lotion for their wounds. Yet you never heard them utter a moan or a groan, or saw them show any sign of restlessness or any disposition to complain. The thought was forced upon me. The rascals, they have served other people so in their day. It being their own turn now, they were not expecting any better treatment than this. So their philosophical bearing is not an outcome of mental training, intellectual fortitude, reasoning. It is mere animal training. They are white Indians.